Good evening. It is Wednesday, March 9th, 2022. It is 6:04 p.m. And we are in the Nashua North Boardroom. This evening we start our budget season. So welcome everybody to our first budget meeting for fiscal year 2023. Let's see, Ms. Darling? Is Ms. Darling on the phone?
Christina, can you hear us?
Yeah, here. Sorry, my mute button didn't want to turn off, but here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Claffey?
Here.
Ms. Giglio?
Here.
I'm here. Ms. Lampier is not here yet. Ms. Brown?
Here.
Hi. Ms. Seam is not
Ms.
here.
Lampier won't be here tonight. Sorry.
Okay.
She won't be here. She has another engagement.
Okay, Ms. Zeem is not here. Ms. Johnson?
Present.
And Ms. Bishop?
Here.
Okay, any objections to Ms. Darling being on the phone this evening?
I have none. No, was she in the room alone?
Are you in the room alone, Ms. Darling?
Yes, I am.
Okay. We also have Dr. McKinney and Mr. Donovan here to make sure that we are on the straight and narrow here. All right. So having said that, Mr. Donovan and Dr. McKinney have prepared a presentation for us, which I'm excited to see. So take it away, Dr. McKinney.
Okay, thank you. So this is our FY23 budget overview as proposed by the district leadership team. I'm going to begin with the first couple of slides here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Donovan for the so the DLT provided feedback in the budget process. That means the two assistant superintendents, myself, Mr. Donovan, the directors of student services, human resources, special education, communication, and special education. I may have said that twice. After that, we reviewed those the feedback together, myself, Mr. Donovan, and Mr. Danielson, who's the assistant business manager, and we finalized the budget recommendations coming before you for the FY23 budget presentation. Some of our priorities in this budget is to maintain current staffing, programs, and resources. Certainly working to expand our special education staffing and to meet the needs of those students. We addressed out-of-district tuition. We have some supports in here for ongoing safety and security of our facilities. And this will begin a process where we can build the district budget and supplement with state and federal funds that we'll talk about throughout our meetings together. Certainly, we have some challenges and some opportunities. We're continuing to find ways to respond to the needs of our kids, which are certainly has been the challenge this year. Included in this budget, we have some technology requests that we'll speak to, increase in things like subscriptions. We included some staffing requests in this budget. And then, like I spoke about just a moment ago, we'll address some of the state and federal funding pieces that come our way to work in tandem with this budget. Mr. Donovan.
Okay, so quick Nashua at a glance. Our district, we have 18 schools, as everyone probably is well aware. Number of students. This is the October 1st count, which is used for all the state reporting. So as you can see, as of 10/1/21, it was 10,138. The previous year, it was 10,165. Now, the interesting thing is in 18 and 19, those numbers were 11,025 and 11,162. So basically about 900 students that were in our district a couple years ago are no longer here. Will they come back next year? We don't know, but if not, then you're looking at a more of a 10,000 number of students as opposed to the 11 or 12 that we've been dealing with the last few years. Total number of staff, there's 4 additional versus last year in the operating budget, so there's 1,776. That includes all staff. And then there's 99 others that are in grant funding. We'll talk more about that later. Total number of teachers, 1,027. All of those are not necessarily full-time. Some could be part-time. And of that, the breakdown of that, 955 are in this budget that we're going to be discussing tonight, and 72 are in the grant funding. The cost per student, we do a report each year called the DOE report, and it takes all the data from the previous year. The average cost per student in Nashua is now $15,288. That number the previous year was only $13,831, so there was a fairly significant increase. Typically, it does not increase that much in one year. But I think what you're seeing is costs are continuing to rise and the number of students are going down, thus the calculation, you'll get a higher number. Free and reduced lunch, you'll notice at the end of that I said free lunch for all. Ever since COVID came, we haven't had a real accurate count on free and reduced because families don't need to fill out the forms to get lunch. Lunch is available for all students for free now based on the federal government guidelines. So I just left the 41% there to say that's the last time we've actually had an accurate count on that. Number of ELL students is 1,558, which is 15%. Last year, that number was 14%, so a slight increase. And the number of special ed students is 2,093. That was 19% last year. It's 20% this year, so once again, a slight increase. Okay, here's our colorful slide, our pie chart. I do like the colors. But basically, it's a way to sort of take a look at what the budget was last year. Now, that's the budget last year, the year we're in now, compared to this proposed budget. Actual numbers may turn out to be slightly different, but it gives you a good sense to see where most all our costs are in those top two categories, labor and benefits, so the cost of people. That's like 84 to 85% of our costs in the operating budget. And then when you tick down utilities, transportation, the out-of-district tuition, and the OTPT and specific services for SPED students, that's basically 96% of your costs. So the all other is only 4%. So even though it's a reasonably sized number, it's only 4% of the total. Okay, just as a general view of the operating budget is the largest portion of the school funding, but it's just one of the funding levels. Excuse me. So the 106, this is last year's budget, the current year we're on now. So the board approved a $116 million budget. Then the benefits, FICA, pension, those are added by the city. There are obviously costs associated with our employees, school district employees. That's another 46. We also have, excuse me. We also have federal grants. Now that 16 million was an estimate that was in there, but that's things like Title I, which is about 5 million a year, IDEA, which is about 4.5 million a year. There's other Title III and Title IV grants, there's the Perkins grant, so when you add all those up, they'll equal somewhere between 15 and 16 million on an annual basis. I put in here the ESSER CARES funds, and you note it's between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 25 at this point, but that's $45 million. So those will be spent over that time period. Year to date, we've allocated, not necessarily spent, but allocated, which means we've requested the funds in the grant and the state has approved them, about 18 million of that. You will be seeing coming forward, since it's 45 million and it's such a large number, there will be some construction projects. Construction pretty much defined as mostly improving HVAC systems in the schools. So you'll, as I said, in the next couple of months, you'll be seeing more information on that. Excuse me, I'm dealing with a cold. Okay, another cost is our bonded debt. That's pretty much what we use when we do renovations to schools. That number's probably as low as it's been in a long time because the high school bonds are falling off. But the middle school bonds are going to start building up, so that number's going to start going back up. Last year, that number was about 9.2 million. Special revenue funds, most of what that is, those are self-sustaining funds. Think of the food service. That's the bulk of what that is. So revenue comes in from the federal government or from people buying lunches, which then funds that program. Do you think I can? Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was getting better, but. And then the last item is the revenue to offset the costs. So basically, we get most of that 44 million, about 40 of that is the state funding for schools, the adequacy funding that's called, so that's about 40 million of that. And then there's items like the special education funding the state gives us, about 1.8 million, building aid, which is 1.3 million, and the Medicaid, which is about $1 million. Okay, so I usually start off, this is called defining the base. So any increase, any percentage increase that you see and we'll be talking about over the next few slides are based on what last year's budget was at the level before benefits are added. So last year, the Board of Education approved a budget of $116,442,506. I'll add, the city added the 46 million, and then they make a transfer. If the contract hasn't been approved yet, they transfer that out, and they'll put it back on your books when the contract's approved. But if someone were to look at the school budget for the city, you know, some people will say, well, the budget was 116 million. No, the operating budget is 161 million. So if you look at the budget, the adopted budget for the schools, you'll see the number is 161 million. Okay, so this year's budget, as I said last year, it was 116 was approved. The proposed budget this year is 121,864,000. That's a 5.422 increase, or 4.66%. And you'll see how that compares to other percentage increases over the last few years. So basically, I break those numbers, the 116 and the 122 million, and say, okay, how much of that is salaries and how much of that is non-salaries? So the increase in the salary budget is 4.5 million. So of the total increase of 5.4 million, 4.5 of it is salaries. So that's a 4.99% for that piece of the budget.
Can I ask a quick question? Could you tell me how much of this was salaries again, of that increase?
What's that again?
You had said that the increase...
That's all the salaries.
The 4.5...
4.99? The 4.5 increase is all salary increase.
It's all salary increases?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so just sort of breaking down the salaries. Now, when I say salaries, it's all payments we make to employees. So obviously, you can see the biggest piece there are the actual full-time and part-time wages. That line item would also include any salary increases we put aside as we're negotiating contracts. So that number from 22 to 23 increased by basically $4.4 million. The longevity line, which is a payment made to employees that have been in the district for a period of time, each contract has different parameters, but that increase went up $15,000 based on what we paid this past year. Severance is in this budget $200,000 higher than what we've been running, which is about $800,000. The reason for that is we have the teachers need to put in their retirement letter by February 1st. We've been running about 25 retirements a year. This year it's 40. So I did a quick calculation based on each of those teachers, and that number is going to be significantly higher, so I increased the severance line. And then all the other accounts listed down there. Wages per diem, which are, a lot of that is summer school costs, but it's also if somebody were to, wages per diem is basically a lot of the substitute costs. The additional hours is summer school and when teachers and other staff work extra hours. Any stipends, most of the stipends are for coaches and head teachers. Overtime, which is about I think it's about $350,000. Most of that is custodial and maintenance costs. And then the attrition. Now, what the attrition is, if you have people leave, let's say it's someone making $70,000 leaves, and then you turn around and you hire someone at $50,000, and that's sort of a savings, so to speak, of $20,000. So that's a negative number. So I increased that attrition. It was $350,000. I increased it to $450,000 because of the number of retirements. So the net effect of the 40 retirements in the budget is an increase of $100,000. Okay, this is the other piece of the budget. The labor piece is 78% of the costs. These are all the other costs. This is the other 22%. The increase here is $880,000, which is a 3.47% increase. So basically, 22% of the budget is increasing 3.47%. 78% of the budget is increasing 4.99%, which nets to an increase of 466, which we had on the earlier slide. Okay, now if you want, the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about the increases in accounts. In your book, you will see in section 12A, it lists all the accounts. That's what we're going to be looking at here, the various increases. So if you want to follow along, fine. If not, we can just go through it. The contracted services, and the 5.3 means it's in the 5.3 series, because there's more than one contracted service account in the chart of accounts. This account has increased $333,000, which is fairly significant. A lot of it is due to a fiber upgrade that the IT department has planned. Having worked in central office and being shut down for a full day a few weeks ago and then a half day, part of what this project will do will bring our infrastructure up to date. When IT comes to speak, Mr. Rodriguez will give you more details on what's actually going to happen. But this is a project that we haven't done in a while. You'll see later on one of his other accounts is decreased, so we sort of moved it over. And there's also a couple of increases in his Cisco accounts related to the telephones, which were kind of surprising. He didn't expect. There's also probably about $65,000 or so of increase in SPED contracts. Marcia Bagley, when she comes here, she'll speak more specifically to those. And then there's a number of increases to plant operations contracts. The cost of services is going up, and so it's a total of $333,000 increase, which for that account is higher than we would typically see. Okay, the heating gas is increased versus last year, but typically if you went back to fiscal year 21 or fiscal year 20, it was closer to this $950. We had, knowing that with COVID there'd be fewer students in, things like that, we knew there'd be some savings. We did agree to another 2.5 or 3 year agreement on the pricing, so even though prices increase, especially now with gas prices and things like that, we have a fixed rate on our gas and our electric accounts, so we will not see significant increase on the cost of the therm or the kilowatt. We may see some increase on the transmission of those. But basically what this is doing this year is sort of bringing us back to what we can expect when students are in full time. Telephone account. I was told 5 years ago this account would go down when we put in the new telephone system. It has not gone down. It's been the last 3 years about $150,000, so I said, let's budget what it is, not what we hope it to be. Maybe we'll get some news on that soon. Transportation, this is mostly the first student contract. That's a 3% increase. It's actually slightly less if you do the math, but the contract itself has a 3% increase. We're having some savings on a couple of the other smaller vendors, but it's not as high an increase.
Oops, Mr. Donovan, does that transportation contract include the cost of gas, or will we see an increase for that?
Luckily, when we negotiated that contract, we basically said the cost of fuel is up to you. If it goes up, you're going to pay more. If it goes down, you enjoy the benefit. So we stayed out of the fuel game. And I'll give Mrs. Johnson a little props for that. She's the one that asked the question.
Nice. Well done, Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you very much. I guess I'm a pretty good negotiator. I'm a ghost negotiator.
Okay, tuition out of district. For those of you who've been around for a while, you know that number goes up and up each year. We've been running over that. We've been adding $100,000 a year to that line item, and then it's typically been running higher than that, but we've been able to use maybe an excess in one of the other accounts to cover the cost. This gets us closer. It looks like this year we have fewer students out of district this year. So it looks like our number is going to come in closer to what we have budgeted, as opposed to the last few years where it was closer to like 6.3 million. Okay, the other contracted service, that's an increase in one of the curriculum lines, and when the curriculum assistant super comes, she'll explain that. Plant operations supplies. Mr. Smith has been bugging me for years. I've been playing hardball with him. I was trying to get more money into his supply accounts, especially electrical, plumbing, HVAC. Those costs have totally skyrocketed. I've held them kind of flat for the last few years, but so this is not just one account, this is a number of his supply accounts. I mentioned 3 of them, I think it's a total of 5 of them. So it's an increase of $42,000, which I think is an average about 6 or 7%, but he requested much higher than that, but I said, we're just gonna have to do the best we can. Maybe we'll do a few less repairs or things like that, but we do need more funds in that account.
Can I ask a question on that line too?
Sure.
As we are using the ESSER funds to make improvements in our HVAC, does that mean higher rated filters and then increased cost for that? And then is that incorporated in this?
The filters, we're still using ESSER funds to pay for the filters, the higher rated filters now, which we've been using MERV 13 and 14. Prior to this, we were using like MERV 8 filters. So I guess the question will have, when the ESSER funds start drying up, and if the COVID continues to decline, we may go back at some point because the higher level filters are more expensive. The other thing that they do is the fans have to run harder and longer, so you use more electricity.
Right.
Now, it's certainly the right thing to do, keep the air as clean as possible, but that will be something we'll probably be dealing with in another year or two.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then three more on the increases. There's subscriptions. Now, with teaching today, there's a lot more computer-oriented, and fewer books, fewer textbooks, more what we call subscriptions. So the increases are pretty much driven by the curriculum budget. And when Mrs. Sarfty comes in, she'll explain what the new subscriptions are. Security equipment. Back about 5 years ago, we spent over $2 million to put in cameras and much more, made the schools much safer. With that, those things don't last forever. There's a cost. Last year, Plan Ops requested $30,000. I gave them 15, so I gave them the other 15 this year. Will that number need to increase over time? Probably. But we also have a maintenance agreement with them too. So. And then computer software. As everyone probably knows that purchases any computer software, the price of your license goes up every year. If it's an item, for example, the budget for the increase in our Microsoft products is $15,000 higher next year than it is this year. There's not much you can do. It's not like you have another vendor you can go to. But when IT comes in, they have a list of all the various computer softwares, and we can probably even show where the biggest increases are, but I know Microsoft's one of them, Naviance, things that we use all the time. So we don't have a lot of flexibility unless we were to switch vendors, but that's typically not the easiest thing to do. Okay, reductions. I wish this was larger, but it's only 3 items. The instruction services, the decrease here is mostly due to the youth council. We had a middle school program for suspended students where those students would go to work with tutor during the day. We have recently just started working with the youth council and with the Y, and we have a program not just for middle school but also for high school students that started a couple weeks ago. So basically we don't need this contract anymore, it's all put into that other contract. That contract, from what I've heard, has done very well to start. That is in the ESSER funds, and we'll definitely fund that the rest of this year, and we'll fund that next year with ESSER funds also. Buildings and ground maintenance, it was the one count I could convince Sean that he didn't need as much as he asked for, so that was just getting back at him. And the computer equipment line is negative. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the contracted service, there was an increase there. We have spent a lot of money on computer. You know, all teachers have laptops now. There's been a lot of Chromebooks added. So we just don't have the need right now for as many units, new units.
Can I ask a question on this? We've got Chromebooks on one. A parent sent us an email talking about one of the schools. I think it was maybe Elm Street or something. I'm not too sure. About they were supposed to get the Chromebooks in the second semester, and I guess the Chromebooks haven't been given out. It was an email sent to the board.
Yeah, I think it was regarding South High School, one of
South
the
High
high
School, I knew it
schools.
was a school. Can we look into what's happened here, or do we know why the Chromebooks weren't given out? Have they been?
I think there was something about, like, you had to sign a contract and,
So I haven't replied to that email. That's about the one-to-one pilot at the high school. We have most of it set up. We just have to set up the mechanism to collect payment for the Chromebooks to issue them to students. So we'll be doing that shortly, but we've been running a little bit behind because we've been focused on another vendor that's changing the food service piece with technology, and then this piece is going to happen next.
But we're going to answer the parent. We're going
I will
to.
get back to that parent, yes.
Okay, thank you. I just want to
Yep.
make sure. Thank you.
I'll share my response with the board.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, the two other accounts that you'll notice if you scan that budget document that I mentioned earlier is electricity's down 450,000, and there's a debt payment, which is a new account, which is up 454,000. If you recall, we did an RFP back about 2 or 3 years ago. We hired a company called EEI, and they came in and they upgraded our 2 high schools, put in new lights, put in a lot of new equipment, and they guaranteed, as part of the deal, is we got debt to pay them, and they guaranteed we'd receive savings. So the first year of that is kind of upon us. So we changed the budgeting in that way. I'll probably be at Finance and Ops in a couple of months. We'll talk more about this specific plan because the project, for the most part, was done, I think, in November. There were a few things wrapping up, which I think I just got the new invoice yesterday. So, but that's why there's a difference in those accounts. We're hopefully going to be saving that much money on electricity.
Mr. Donovan, do we have any change in our electricity costs based on the solar projects? I know we had one that hasn't been set up at Pennachuck yet because of the project, but we had Dr. Crisp and
We
the high
have
schools.
Dr. Crisp and Fairgrounds both have it, and they've been up for all of this year. So I think the answer is yes to that.
Okay.
I can, we'll get an update on that. Probably we'll tie it in with this at a Finance and Ops.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, these are the additional labor resources that are in this budget. We're adding, it's shown as a 1 teacher being added at Brentwood. Right now, there are 2 part-time teachers. One is a graphic arts and one is another one. But the plan is the students there have to sometimes take the same course because they only have so many courses. So this is to increase those 2 people to full-time so that they can teach more courses. And I think, if we're going to get this program to the right place, it's probably makes sense to do this. So that's in the budget. I received 4 or 5 different emails from middle school staff. According to them and according to the Assistant Superintendent Parker, there's sort of an inequity in the reading specialists, and the middle school fairgrounds has 1 fewer than everybody else. They did request it last year. It didn't make it in the budget last year, so it's in the budget this year. Franklin Street facility only has 1 secretary. We hope to have all 3 floors filled. Come September, if that's the case, they're going to need to have another person in the building, especially as a secretary. Every other school has 2. They should have 2 also. And we're adding 1 custodian back. with the middle school project, Pennachuck is going to be mostly done next year. So the size of Pennachuck is going to increase, though the size of Elm Street is not going to decrease until the new school's in place, which is a couple years from now. So we're going to add one for now, and then we'll see what happens in a couple of years when the new school comes online. Okay, other additional non-labor resources. There's, SPED has a new contract for contracted service for audiologists, and I'll leave that up to Marcia, who knows a lot more about that than I do, to speak to it, and she will. The fiber upgrade that I mentioned earlier on the contracted service, that's $180,000. We're hoping we can work this out. We can use some E-rate funds and get that number lower. In doing this project, we're also going to be sort of helping out the city, because you can't, to do the our network's all tied in with the city network. So maybe there's at some point that this number could go down because maybe the city will pitch in, but at this point, we budgeted the full amount. And then our new budget software, which we're using for the first time this year. Last year, there was no cost to it because we had used some excess funds from the previous year. But budgeting for next year, the license for that is going to be about $26,000 a year. So those are the sort of non-labor amounts. Okay. Yeah.
All right, you're stuck with me for a minute. We're going to give Mr. Donovan a rest. There are two assistant principal positions that are funded half by the operating budget and half by the Title IV grant. So we're, in this budget, recommending we bring those 2.5 positions out of the Title IV grant and into the operating budget. So there's one at Birch Hill and one at Sunset Heights. So both 1.0 FTEs for both positions will be fully funded from the operating budget.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Why would we take them out of a grant and have it fully funded by the district now versus having a grant funded?
I would say there are two reasons. Stability. When there's grant funding can be move up and down, and these positions would be subject to that. And two, by moving them into the operating budget, we open up grant funding for other resources for kids and teachers, like professional development, technology resources, Gen Yes program, other resources. Title IV is mainly STEM related and other enrichment opportunities for kids.
And let me just follow that up. Do we share our grant writer with the city, or do we have a full-time one?
We share the grant writer with the city. Well, the city shares the grant writer with us.
So, would we get more grants if we had somebody dedicated just to be a grant writer?
I think you would want to start with having a review of the grants that she's been able to obtain and the amount that she's obtained. It's certainly more likely if you had a full-time person, you could obtain more grants, but I think she's done a nice job for us in the grants that she's obtained and the resources she's brought to the district.
Well, I guess my question is, because we're moving grant money around to open up more for the funding for the Title IV, so we can have more resources in other places with the Title IV grant money. But, I mean, yeah, we're probably getting a good amount of grants, but the question would be how much more grants could we get if we had somebody who was, and I don't want to add any more positions and pay any more salaries out, but if you get a good grant writer, she's worth her weight in salary because she's going to be bringing in all these grants. That money can come out of the operating budget, maybe be used elsewhere, or be able to just reduce the budget because you don't need that money anymore. I've known this, I've said this even the first time I was on the board about a grant writer, because I knew grant writers who worked in Massachusetts, and they were bringing money hand over fist to their districts because that's what they did. That's they wrote grants, they had the time to search for the school district. So if she's half and half, she's searching for the mayor and the city at that point, and then she's searching for us at this point. So she's, half and half. So that's something that maybe we should think about to kind of get an idea. If she was full-time on the city, on the school district, what could she produce for us? Just to get an idea in the budget, so we can, as we go through this budget, we can find out how much more money she could get for us.
So we'll bring an update to the board.
Thank you.
So, yep.
Can I ask a question about the assistant principals as well? There was a time when the assistant principals were also acting as our curriculum specialists. Is that still happening?
So no, the assistant principals are mainly at the building level, doing administrative work at the building level. We do ask some of our peer coaches to help with curriculum work, but when the assistant superintendents come, they can speak to that. I think next year, given our staffing challenges, a lot of those peer coach positions will be asked to fill in a classroom role, so we're fully staffed at the building level, and then work with curriculum teams that combines teachers and admin and directors and other people together to revisit our curriculum.
But that's how this started, where people were placed half in a grant and half in the operating budget. There's probably another 4 elementary assistant principals that are still in the grant. So the whole idea is to try to move some out over time, because as Dr. McKinney said, a lot of them aren't doing the curriculum piece anymore. They're managing the building with their principals. So it makes it more difficult to keep them in the grant. The grant at some point might just say, no, they're not doing what this grant is for. Because even though we have millions of dollars of grants, almost all of our grants, for the most part, are federal grants with very specific rules on what you can use them for. The ESSER funds have more flexibility, but Title I and IDEA, they're very, very specific. So you can't just simply use them for what you want to use them for. And you can't supplant. So if you have costs, you can't take costs out of your operating budget and put them into the grant. That's a typical thing you can't do. Okay, operating budget increases, as you can see, since 17, it's 225, 2524. Last year was 161. And this year, like I said, is 4.66. So that's obviously a significant increase over what we've been requesting before. So that's our presentation. I just have a few things. Over the next 3 weeks, we will have presentations from technology and curriculum and plan operations. All the various departments will be coming. They will all have a presentation and some information to back that up. You'll also be receiving more information on head counts as far as secretaries, where they are, teachers, et cetera. That information will be coming over the next couple weeks. You'll also notice that in your book, you typically would have 2 large documents, the labor, which was all the salaries of all the people. That will be coming in a new format with the new budget. And you'll also be getting sort of the detailed budget. So those documents, they'll be in a slightly different format, so I'll try to explain to everyone when I bring them. Because with the new system, the format's slightly different. Not a huge difference, but there is some difference. And as you review things, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me. It's easier sometimes if you have a question to let me know in advance. We'll get the answer and hopefully have it at the meeting. Sometimes I know things off the top of my head, but sometimes I don't. So if you have any questions, or if there's items you would like to see or data you would like to see, the sooner you let us know, the quicker we can get it to you.
I have a question. Will we be meeting every Wednesday night from now on? Or, okay. Because for some reason, I didn't have it on my calendar for next week.
Yeah, if you look at 1A in your book, It shows the next 7 weeks
Okay.
and exactly what's scheduled for each evening.
Okay, great, thank you.
So it says to be determined for the location, but it's here.
Okay.
Can I ask a question here? So the mayor, last year, we had an increase of the 1.6%. And this year, he said there should be no more than a 3.3% increase to the
Yes,
school?
but if you read further down, he talks about if the teacher contract is approved, that he's willing to take the savings from the medical projection. He's projecting 2.3 million in savings, and that money would then be used to get us closer to that 4.66. When you do the math, the 3% plus the 2.3 million, the 4.66% is a couple $100,000 less than that.
I'm not going to say anything. I think this budget's a little bit inflated to begin with. I think this 4.6% to, in this budget with everything that's going on in the city. I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the city end also. Everybody better hold on to their wallets because this year's going to be a balloon. And what he's doing in projects and with this, it's really sad. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
I want to ask a question about, on page 11, the salary increases.
Sorry, section 11 or page 11 of the,
Page 11 of the booklet, I don't know,
okay, of this particular presentation?
salary increases. So I was wondering, I believe you said, Mr. Donovan, that maybe 15 more retirements than expected on an average year?
Yes.
So I was wondering, the FY23 estimate for wages, full-time, part-time, that number wouldn't reflect the exceptionally high number of retirees, right? It'd be based on kind of the current number of people at the top.
Yes.
So I guess I was wondering whether, given the number of, the exceptionally high number of retirees, whether we could reasonably assume that that number is going to be less, assuming that these vacancies, these retirees would be filled with less experienced teachers, lower steps.
Well, see that in the all other accounts at the bottom, it says attrition. There's a negative attrition number, so that's where that's in effect budgeted.
I did hear you say that. I just want to be sure.
Okay.
So just to make things clear in my mind, because we're talking about two different lines, you're accounting for that already?
Yes, we account for an estimate.
Okay,
Now, it's typically a conservative estimate because if someone retires at the top, it doesn't mean we're not going to hire someone at the top. Especially in this environment, there might be fewer younger teachers. I mean, historically, if a elementary teacher at the top left, we would hire someone relatively young to take that because there's a lot of elementary teachers, young elementary teachers. In today's environment, it's a little trickier. And we've always held in Nashua that we hire the best candidate. We're not just going to hire based on a savings. So, and the reality is, for example, like I increase severance, I know I've got to pay that severance number. I've done the calculation. It's per the contract. I know that's an increase in cost. I don't honestly know what the net savings are, so that's an estimate. If I don't get it, then I've got another budget problem. So I tend to be a little conservative with that number. And until everyone's hired, come August, September, I won't know what the number is.
So if I look at FY22, the other labor accounts, I see that number is bigger than FY23, and that number is kind of subtracted?
The attrition number?
Yes.
No, the attrition number in 22, if I listed just attrition, that number was 350,000 in 22, it's 450,000 in 23. Actually, 360 and 460, I'm sorry, it's...
So it's $100,000?
If you look at this
Yep, I will.
sheet, yeah, the 51800, you can see the difference there, 360 to 460.
So if we project that, say that the replacement teacher is going to be $20,000 less than the person at the top who retired, and we have 15 more retirees than we typically have, wouldn't we have a bigger number than $100,000?
We could have a bigger number, but we might not. I mean, we are using that 20,000 number. I don't project 20,000 per teacher. I just project an estimate of what I think the difference is going to be. You know, like I said, there's nothing that, there's no average number that we use for that.
I understand it. I just,
You know, the only way you could get to what I think you're looking for, in other districts I've worked, there's a cap or a ceiling on what you hire a teacher at. So you can go to a ceiling of master's plus 15. That's as high as you can go without the superintendent's authorization to go higher. We don't have a cap like that. So to suggest that we hire everybody at a lower salary is not always the case, because we have teachers from surrounding districts that or live here and want to work here and come in, and they may be at a level that's lower or in some cases higher than the teacher they're replacing. So that's why it's an estimate. We don't really know until after we're done hiring, which we're hoping to start, you know, late April and then continues all the way until mid-September.
okay, my last question. So was the estimate for this fiscal year, the all other labor accounts, was that pretty close for the attrition number that you had plugged in?
I don't know that off the top of my head right now.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions on the PowerPoint from tonight? Or questions about the budget process in general? Or the mayor's letter that was included in here? I mean, not that Mr. Donovan can reach into the mayor's mind, but general questions about the letter? No? Okay. Did you guys have anything further for us this evening? No? Okay, so I have on here that next week will be athletics and technology. For people who haven't gone through this process before, it's really wonderful. It's worth a watch if you're out in the public, because the directors of each area of specialization come in and they explain how they work and how they serve our students and why they need what they need. And it's really, I found the best opportunity to learn about the nuts and bolts of how the school district works. The other thing I just want to throw out there is that I'm going to be looking for volunteers to fill in as budget chair for the weeks of March 30th and April 6th, because I will be out on medical leave.
That's
for
fine,
those
Heather,
2
I can take
weeks.
care of it.
Okay, great. I have a volunteer.
Just ask a busy person.
I was going to voluntold someone, but I thought I'd be polite about it.
It's just doing roll call. I can handle that.
It is, and like if someone raises their hand, this is the best committee of all the committees.
Right.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Sorry, Paula.
Okay. On the motion to adjourn, Ms. Darling?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Claffey?
Yes.
Ms. Gilio?
Yes.
Ms. Raymond says a yes. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
And Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned at 6:57.